Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2020 and to your qualifying review here in Bahrain for the Formula 1 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix. As always, spoiler warning up ahead for today's qualifying session, so if you've not yet seen it, I would advise going away, watching the highlights and coming back afterwards. But for all of you that have seen it, as always, you know the drill by now. We'll go through today's times, how's the grid shaping up for tomorrow's Grand Prix, take a look at each driver's session, how well have they done in comparison to their teammate, who's driver of the day, ones to watch for tomorrow's Grand Prix, and I will send you on your merry way and hopefully towards an awesome Grand Prix tomorrow. So as always, if you are new, feel free to subscribe. Spoiler warning out of the way, this is your result for qualifying for the Bahrain Grand Prix. And for the 98th time in his Formula 1 career, 2020 World Champion lived up to that title. Pole position here in Bahrain, 3/10 in front of teammate Valtteri Bottas. Hamilton untouchable in the night of Bahrain. Max Verstappen the closest challenger once again to the two Mercedes cars, but perhaps more of a surprise was teammate Alex Albon. P4 for the Thai driver, much better today in terms of grid position. Timing wise, there's still a couple of attempts to make up, but a much better job from Alex Albon, who leads kind of our best of the rest position with Sergio Perez for Racing Point just in behind, 4/10 behind Albon. You then have to go back 1/10 to Daniel Ricciardo, 2/1000 to Esteban Ocon in P7. A great job today for Renault, 6th and 7th. Gives them an awesome opportunity for points tomorrow. Pierre Gasly was the first of both AlphaTauris that made it through into Q3. Lando Norris P9 and the other AlphaTauri of Danny Kvyat rounded out your top 10. Just missing out, and not for the first time in 2020, the two Ferrari cars. And for the second consecutive weekend, it's Sebastian Vettel just out-qualifying teammate Charles Leclerc. Vettel starting to get a little bit of momentum now, heading into these final 3 weekends. Lance Stroll, pole position last time out in Turkey, wasn't quite so lucky this time out. Struggled in qualifying, only one place in front of Williams' George Russell, who had another incredible session getting that awful car through to Q2. And Carlos Sainz, the other driver to make it through to Q2, didn't set a time, a rear brake failure it seems, maybe to do with the gearbox. No official statement yet from McLaren, but some kind of failure on the rear of the car, meaning he set no lap time in Q2, all the way down in P15, and had a lot of work to do tomorrow in the Grand Prix. Antonio Giovinazzi out-qualified teammate Kimi Raikkonen by quite a sizable margin, 3/10 between the two Alfa Romeo boys. It was a super difficult day for the two Haas cars, both of which 3/10 off Kimi Raikkonen, 6/10 off Antonio Giovinazzi, and poor Nicholas Latifi was in P20, rounding out your grid. And that is your order for tomorrow's Grand Prix. We may see a grid penalty dished out to Carlos Sainz, depending on how much damage was on that McLaren. But if everything stays hunky-dory, stays normal, as we're expecting, this will be your grid. So we'll move swiftly over into our qualifying rundown. I think I'll do it session by session today. Sometimes we start at the back of the grid, sometimes we start at the front, sometimes we do team by team, but I want to start off with this back pack because, as always, like we have seen so often in 2020, it's those three teams at the back of the field: Williams, Haas and Alfa Romeo. And it looked to be, especially early on, now, Williams were going to be the team right at the bottom end. Haas maybe just in front, and Alfa Romeo, there's a possibility that maybe one of their boys would sneak into Q2. But it's that same story we have seen all season long, the shining star of qualifying throughout 2020, but especially in that backpack. George Russell through into Q2 once again, ruining teammate Nicholas Latifi, and in the process, George took the best ever streak, or joint best ever streak, of out-qualifying a teammate, 37 races in a row. He's never been beaten in qualifying. If he can do that next time out, next weekend in Bahrain, he will take the record away from Nelson Piquet. But I think we all know George would much rather have a couple of points under his belt by this point of his career. But I think, especially today, when that car was looking dreadful through all 3 practice sessions, that is a huge result for a team really struggling at the moment. Haas, were just nowhere. It's been a strange year for the team anyway. Last year was all over the place. Sometimes they were able to score big results. Kevin Magnussen was in the top 6 here last year at Bahrain. He qualified 5th in Austria. And it's looking more and more likely, nigh on impossible, for the team to get anywhere close to Q3 this year. An awful mess of a session today. No real mistakes from either driver. You can see from the gaps, just 3/100ths between the two of them. So close, but that car just looks so difficult to drive. Grosjean coming on the radio at the end of the session saying, look, all I wanted to do, boys, is just have a fun drive, try and get to the checkered flag and just enjoy it for one of his final weekends in Formula 1. But the car just wasn't good enough. And you can see from the feedback from both drivers, the body language in and out the car, it's just not going their way at the moment. And I think both of them were hoping for a grand finish to their Formula 1 career. Both of them are going to be very lucky to get anywhere near the point tomorrow, but also in the remaining 2 races. Alfa Romeo is a team I don't often talk about, but they were the other team out in Q1. Giovinazzi, I think, did a really solid job today. I think he's been much better, far more consistent in 2020. 3/10 in front of Kimi Räikkönen. Nothing to be snubbed out. A really good job from Gio today. Kimi, who's been on the front row here several times. And Alfa Romeo, if they can get their strategy right tomorrow, and if things are a little bit more carnage up ahead than they normally are, they could have a sniff at points. I think they're much better than Haas. I think their biggest rival will be George Russell. And again, George on fire today. Awesome job in that back group. But talking about Q2, we had the 2 Ferraris go out. Lance Stroll, Russell, that we've already spoke about, and Carlos Sainz. And it's Carlos Sainz, that big incident, I think we need to talk about here, because we're all aware the championship at the top is done and dusted. Drivers' champion Lewis Hamilton, team's champion Mercedes, Red Bull pretty much guaranteed second. So one of the, I think, most exciting stories left in 2020 is this fight for best of the rest. And whilst Lando Norris was able to progress through to Q3, Carlos Sainz, sadly, a rear failure on that McLaren, put him way out of contention, wasn't able to set a lap in Q2. What kind of damage is that heading into the race tomorrow? I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier on. We could very well see a penalty coming Carlos Sainz's way. And I think if that does happen, he will start at the back of the grid. Maybe if that does come into play, it's not an awful idea to start from the pit lane. Turn 1 in Bahrain can get a little bit airy-fairy, but at the same time, it's an awesome opportunity to make up positions. That first sector is nice and open. I really enjoy this circuit, and certainly it's one where overtaking can happen. So I'm really excited to see what McLaren do tomorrow, because they're certainly going to have to split up their strategies. Along with Racing Point, Lance Stroll, pole position last time out, this time absolutely nowhere. He was not happy when he came on the team radio. Half a second off getting through to Q3, something's not gone right there. I believe he was on an old set of mediums. No one else decided to do that at the end of the session. A strange decision from Racing Point. I'm sure they had some idea on their head of why they were doing that. Maybe, this is real tinfoil hat time now, maybe they were thinking they could possibly get one car out in Q2, use that awesome strategy option of starting on new tyres, hope Perez gets a great result, which he did, and then do a little dual strategy option. I doubt that's the case though. Not a great job from Lance Stroll. And the other 2 cars out in Q2, the 2 Ferraris, it happens so often in 2020, but also as we've seen over the last few years, 11th and 12th isn't always a bad place to start. I highly doubt they'll be under pressure from George Russell, the 2 Alphas, the 2 Haas cars, maybe Carlos Sainz getting back through the field. I think he's got a quicker car, and certainly Lance Stroll's got a quicker car. But I think the 2 Ferrari boys we saw last time out, sometimes starting on the alternate strategy, safety cars come into play, alternate strategies really start throwing and mixing up the grid. This could really help them tomorrow. Ferrari strategy department this year has been better. It's still not great. It's still a bit of a mess, but it's been better. No Binotto this weekend. Last time that happened, last weekend, Vettel got a podium. Leclerc so close. I doubt we'll see a repeat of Turkey. but I don't think this is a terrible result. Certainly better than a lot of their results in 2020 so far. And just to mention on Seb, getting in front of Leclerc, second weekend in a row, he'll take that. I think that's his big target at the moment, to match Leclerc, be closer, and he's certainly doing that at the moment. And Q3 then, the battle at the front is what we all expected. The two Mercedes and Max Verstappen. Hamilton, faultless on his lap. Valtteri Bottas never really was able to challenge. I thought he'd be a little bit closer. We sometimes see Hamilton lift off the gas a little bit once the championship's over. But I think Hamilton is really gunning for that 100 pole positions to round up the season in Abu Dhabi. And that would be a really quite fitting way to finish his 7th World Championship year. But nevertheless, Valtteri couldn't challenge. And actually Max Verstappen almost half a second off at the end of the session. Definitely not Max's fault. This isn't a circuit that necessarily suits that Red Bull. It seemed to suit them better than the rest of that midfield, however. And that was the fight. I said it earlier. That fight for best of the rest, 3rd in the constructors, 4th in the drivers, is the one that is going to be so juicy until the end of the year. And so it proved. The gap between 4th and 10th was 3 tenths, but the gap between 4th and 8th was 1.5 tenths. That is ridiculous. Just a tiny little braking a little bit later, a slight correction. That's all that is on a lap, which is incredible. And I think proves that without Mercedes, Formula 1 would be brilliant, but at the same time, as I always say, it's up to other teams to catch up with the Mercs. But the fight on in that midfield today was awesome. Alex Albon, I said it earlier on, I think a bit of a surprise to finish P4 after that crash earlier on in the weekend. We were all trying to work out yesterday how that was going to affect his confidence. Of course, last time out in Turkey, that potential win down the drain, no points at all in the previous 2 races before that. So a real statement like this is exactly what he needed. 6 tenths is still a big gap. And actually, on weekends where he's finished 8th, 7th, 9th, whatever, in the top 10, he's been closer to Max in terms of time. So it's a bit of a mixed bag today. But the result on paper is much better, and he's got a great opportunity to really take this opportunity and prove to Red Bull he deserves to be there next year. But I think just what adds that little bit extra spice is the man behind him, Sergio Perez. An awesome lap at the end of the session. He knows if he wants that Red Bull seat, he has got to beat Albon tomorrow, and I cannot wait to see those two fighting in the early laps and throughout the Grand Prix, because I think a lot of the race tomorrow will be about that midfield, about the 2 Renaults coming into play. You had a great session today. Ricciardo 6th, Ocon 7th, much better from Esteban, 2,000th behind Ricciardo. That is bang on what he needs to be doing for the last 3 Grand Prix. I'm quite chuffed for Esteban. He's had a real up and down season, and I hope he can just nail these final 3 races, of course, up against Fernando Alonso next season. The 2 AlphaTauris, though, I think is going to be one of the biggest stories inside that top 10, because whilst you've got Renault, they're going to be focused on Racing Point, of course, up ahead with Sergio Perez and Norris, and Sainz, what are they going to be able to do pushing forward? But AlphaTauri are kind of in this weird position where they're not fighting for 3rd, but certainly Gasly is fighting to stay within that top 10 and make up as many positions as possible. With both drivers within that top 10, Kvyat down in P10, they've got strategy options there, and they're going to be a real hindrance for those guys that really are in a fight for 3rd place and 4th place in the drivers' standings. So some great drives all around, up and down the field. Not a crazy session today, more of a run-of-the-mill session. But what I'm certainly expecting tomorrow is a race full of overtakes. I think this place is awesome, criminally underrated, and I think we will be treated to a great race tomorrow. A safety car or 2, it's certainly a possibility. Turn 1, I think there could be dramas. But before we go, let's take a quick look at Driver of the Day and ones to watch. Driver of the Day, I actually found quite difficult this time out. Plenty of options available. I almost went with Antonio Giovinazzi, Max Verstappen, but I've given it to George Russell. It seems to be almost every time we talk about qualifying, Russell's got to be in the mix for Driver of the Day. And when you look at the gaps to teammates, by far Russell had the edge over Nicholas Latifi this year. And you kind of just run out of things to say with Russell. 14th, Another great job by George. But yeah, I really did struggle to pick driver of the day today, so I'd love to know yours in the comment section down below. And my ones to watch for tomorrow's Grand Prix, it's that battle. I cannot wait to see Albon and Perez, 4th and 5th, fighting it out for that Red Bull seat for next year. I think it's going to be so juicy. May even be a little bit of contact. So much pressure. So much is on the line for both of these drivers and their future in Formula 1. Cannot wait. Lance Stroll, I've also put on there 13th. He's got a car much better than 13th. There's a lot of potential with different strategies starting around cars where he should be a little bit quicker than them. I think he could have a really strong race tomorrow. But my F1E ones to watch for the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix is Sebastian Vettel. On that alternate strategy, last time out, he got a podium, out-qualifying Charles Leclerc. I don't know. I've got a good feel about Seb this weekend. We're just going to have to wait and see. And that is it for your qualifying review here in Bahrain for the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix. I'll be back after the race tomorrow, which takes place at 2 o'clock GMT. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm pretty confident it's going to be a banger of a Grand Prix. But as always, enjoy the race, guys, and I hope to see you all in the next one.